Claire's phone vibrated against the polished walnut surface of her desk, shattering the careful silence she had maintained all morning. The screen lit up with Jake's name, and a cold weight sank deep into her stomach before she even answered. His voice came through, strained and trembling with fear, calling her name like a plea for help. Claire gripped the phone tighter, shot up from her chair, and grabbed her bag, her heartbeat pounding wildly as she fought to steady her breath. Jake had been attacked on his way home from the library, his words heavy and uneven, as if each one was carved out of pain. The men had come out of nowhere, demanding his laptop and phone, and when he resisted, one of them shoved him to the ground. Claire held her breath, her voice cutting sharper than she intended, fear turning into anger. He was injured in the ribs. The doctor suspected a fracture and said surgery might be necessary if the lung didn't re-inflate on its own. And the hospital demanded an upfront payment of $14,800. Each number struck Claire like a verdict. She knew her bank account held only $300. Every other cent already set aside for Jake's tuition, books, and dorm rent. For 7 years, ever since their parents had passed away, Claire had been his sole guardian. Every dollar she earned had a purpose. Not once had she had a penny to spare. For 6 months she had been working as an executive assistant to Nate Bellamy, earning $11,000 a month, a sum that had stunned her at first. But under the weight of Jake's college expenses and the cost of living, it had begun to feel like dust in her hands. The Bellamy logistics office occupied the top floor of a glass tower in downtown Chicago, filled with expensive art and walls that gleamed with power. The rhythm of phones ringing and heels clicking through corridors was a strange harmony of control and chaos. Claire forced herself not to think too much, keeping her mind sharp and attentive, noticing details she never dared question: how Nate's voice grew cold in after-hours calls, how the security guards checked bags and ID cards with surgical precision, how her boss spoke to partners in an almost coded language. She had learned to be silent, to watch, to remember without asking, because she needed this job more than anything. Adjusting her charcoal gray blazer, making sure her blonde hair was perfectly pinned, she walked toward Nate's office door, her hand hovering over the handle, trembling slightly. 6 months of flawless work, never late, never careless. Managing Nate's impossibly complex schedule had to count for something, she told herself. But she knew Nate Bellamy didn't bend for anyone. She had seen him fire an employee for being late 3 times, cancel a contract with a longtime partner for one missed delivery, ending 15 years of business with a single, cold decision. Staring at the doorknob, tears welled up. She blinked them back, trying to hold herself together. But her body had already decided to break. The pressure of 6 months, the endless balancing of bills and tuition, and now this sudden catastrophe, it all came crashing down. She turned away from the hallway, walking briskly before anyone could see her, unwilling to let tears fall in the middle of a crowded office. The restroom was occupied. The click of heels echoed against the tiles. She couldn't wait. She slipped into the supply room next door, the one she used to grab paper, folders, or expensive pens, locked the door, and sank down beside a box of manila envelopes. The tears came hard, her sobs shaking her entire body. She pressed her hand over her mouth to muffle the sound, arms wrapped tightly around her stomach as if she could hold herself together by sheer force. Jake was hurt. Her brother needed her, and she was running out of money. The sense of helplessness flooded her until she could barely breathe. The scent of paper, toner, and faint cleaning chemicals anchored her to the present, pulling her back from the whirlpool of panic. Time lost, meaning minutes or hours blurred together until her tears finally slowed. Her breath steadied. She wiped her face with the back of her hand, not caring about the ruined makeup. She had to get back to her desk, call the hospital, tell them she was arranging the payment, anything to buy time. To think. The door rattled gently. Claire stood up, her hands still damp with tears. Nate was on the other side, his voice calm but leaving no room for refusal. She realized she had no escape. Fear and tension collided in her chest, and whatever happened next would change everything. If you're still listening now, Perhaps you can feel Claire's heartbeat too fast, too frantic, trembling beneath the weight of everything falling apart. Before we move on to what comes next, where Claire's choices could alter her life and her brother's forever, make sure to subscribe to our channel, like, and share this video so you can journey with us through stories of heartbreak, courage, and the quiet strength that rises from despair. And where are you listening from? Leave a comment below, perhaps you're somewhere quiet, a small corner in a vast world. Hearing Claire's story reach you across the distance. I want to know where her pain has found you, so we can see how deeply these truths still touch the human heart. Claire stood in the hallway, her pulse still hammering, vision blurred with tears as Jake's image on the hospital bed burned in her mind. The number 14,800 echoed in her thoughts like a sentence. She opened her banking app again, $300 left. Every other penny already gone to tuition and housing. For years, Claire had worked without rest, fighting to build a stable life for her brother. Yet now it all felt meaningless. She drew a deep, trembling breath, trying to steady herself as her hand shook, dialing the bank for a personal loan. But every option was too slow, too small, too late. In her mind, the past 6 months replayed the endless emails, the calendars, the meetings, all so trivial compared to the emergency crushing her now. She thought of every paycheck, every bill, every small sacrifice that had brought her here, and the futility of it hollowed her out. Every plan, every savings account had been consumed by necessity, and now the hospital's demand loomed like a wall she couldn't climb. She considered borrowing from friends, from the bank, from anyone, but time and bureaucracy were merciless. The doctors had said if Jake's lung didn't expand, he'd need surgery that very night. And the image of her brother, frightened and in pain, lying alone in that sterile bed, made her chest tighten until it hurt to breathe. She sank to the floor again, arms around her knees, grounding herself in the faint hum of the office, the scent of paper, the distant ring of phones, the muted light filtering through glass. None of it mattered if she couldn't save him. Her thoughts turned to Nate, the man she had just seen. Powerful, detached, yet sharply intelligent. Could he help? Part of her knew asking for an advance or aid was her only path. But pride and fear of rejection made her hesitate. She remembered every vow she had made to protect Jake, every sleepless night since their parents' death, and the weight of that promise now pressed on her like an unbearable stone. She knew she couldn't afford panic, but the helplessness clawed at her, the anxiety swelling until the world felt like it was collapsing around her. Each passing second stretched endlessly. She ran through every possible solution in her mind, each one crumbling before it formed. Her eyes fell on the phone again. Her heart jolted. She knew what she had to do: act, decide, move no matter what it cost. For Jake, for the boy she had sworn to keep safe at all costs. Fear, desperation, and love surged together until her throat ached with the effort to keep from crying again. But she steadied herself. She would not fall apart now, not when every minute counted. Claire rose slowly, inhaled deeply, and made her choice. Whatever it took, whatever rules she had to bend or lines she had to cross, Jake's life mattered more than anything else, and there was no turning back. Claire stepped into Nate's office on trembling legs, her heartbeat still thundering after those desperate minutes in the supply room. The glass door swung open, and light spilled across her boss's polished black suit. His eyes, dark and unreadable, seemed to dissect her, as if he could see every thought she was trying to suppress. Nate Bellamy stood there in silence for several seconds, his face calm but edged with steel. And under that gaze, Claire felt every ounce of fear and helplessness she had carried was laid bare. She drew a deep breath, trying to steady her voice as she searched for words, her eyes fixed on the floor, her chest tight as if her heart were clawing to escape. She told him about Jake, about the sudden attack on his way home from the library, the suspected fractured ribs, the doctor's warning, and the hospital's demand for an upfront payment of $14,800 she could not provide. Every detail came out, weighted with emotion, her panic and despair spilling into each syllable. Nate listened without interruption, his sharp gaze the only response, and the silence between them grew heavier with every second. Finally, he lifted a hand and pressed a button on his desk phone, instructing his assistant, Anthony, to clear his entire schedule for the day. His tone remained calm, but authority filled the room like an invisible current. Claire stared, confused, her pulse pounding, every muscle drawn taut. Then Nate turned back to her, his voice deep and steady, as he said he would cover all of Jake's medical expenses, every cent of the $14,800 required up front, and all subsequent treatment costs. Claire froze, her breath catching. For a moment, she thought she had misheard him. Emotion surged to her throat, the urge to cry almost overwhelming. Yet disbelief held her still. Nate continued, adding that he would also raise her salary to $9,500 a month and provide premium health insurance for both her and one dependent. Relief and fear tangled inside her like opposing storms. She realized this offer wasn't just an act of kindness, it carried a weight, a condition she hadn't yet understood. Nate's voice remained composed but absolute as he laid out the terms. In return, Claire would become his full-time personal assistant, not only managing his official schedule but also handling certain confidential matters, contracts, and dealings that could never leave the walls of his office. His eyes locked onto hers, firm and deliberate. This wasn't a casual offer. She could refuse, but if she did, Jake's fate and hospital bills would be entirely hers to bear. Claire's throat went dry, her heart constricting painfully as she grasped the magnitude of what stood before her. This was a turning point, a choice that crossed every boundary she had ever known. She looked at Nate, searching his expression. Behind the composure and calculation, there was something else, not compassion exactly, but perhaps a trace of recognition, as if he understood the cost of desperation. Thoughts raced through her mind, the years she had raised Jake alone, the countless sacrifices, the endless sense of responsibility. She could not let her brother suffer, not for a single moment longer. Her body trembled as she inhaled slowly, then nodded, a small but decisive motion that sealed her fate. By accepting, she stepped into a world she had never imagined, one where loyalty, secrecy, and moral grayness would intertwine with her daily existence. Nate's lips curved into a faint, knowing smile. He told her that this was an agreement between equals, that he would immediately arrange for Jake's transfer to a private hospital and ensure surgery could take place that very night if necessary. He assured her she would soon see the value of her decision, not only in saving her brother's life, but in the power and responsibility she would come to wield in her new role. Claire felt her heart grow both lighter and heavier at once, her earlier despair transforming into a volatile blend of relief, apprehension, and fragile hope. She understood that from this moment on, her life would never be the same. Every step she took would be bound to this choice, and she would have to face whatever awaited her beyond it, because what Nate had just offered was not simply the salvation of Jake's life, but an open door into a world of power, danger, and secrets she could no longer turn away from. Claire stood in the hallway after her conversation with Nate, her heart caught in a fragile balance between relief and tension. She looked down at her hands, still trembling from the moment she had nodded in agreement, realizing that what she had just accepted was not merely the salvation of Jake's life, but an entry into an entirely different world, one where the boundaries of morality blurred into gray. In her mind, she saw Jake lying in that hospital bed, his eyes glazed with fear and pain, ribs aching, breath shallow. She knew that if she hesitated even for one more night, he would continue to suffer, and the thought hollowed her from within. Drawing in a deep breath, Claire tried to steady the rising tide of fear. Around her, Nate's office gleamed under the afternoon light streaming through vast glass panels, everything polished, expensive, distant, and utterly foreign to the life she had known. She understood, with sudden clarity, that from this moment on, she would have to learn to navigate a complex web of influence and control she had only glimpsed from the edges of meetings and briefings. Every choice, every word, would carry weight. In this world, secrets, loyalty, And risk were not obstacles, they were currency. She thought of every paycheck she had earned, every bill she had paid, every sacrifice made to raise Jake alone. All of it now stood on the edge of something dangerous. But hesitation was no longer an option. Claire inhaled slowly, closing her eyes, feeling each heartbeat resonate like a promise. Jake's life came first. For the first time in her life, she understood what it meant to place duty above every personal conviction. She began to picture what awaited her, managing Nate's schedule, sitting in on high-stakes meetings, handling sensitive documents, and perhaps even negotiating agreements that existed outside the boundaries of law. Each task would demand absolute discretion, precision, and loyalty. She could already feel the invisible weight of the commitment she had made, a strange mixture of fear and adrenaline, part of her wanting to retreat, another part awakening with a fierce determination to take control, to protect Jake, to find a way forward. She took another deep breath, placed her hand on the desk, closed her eyes, and exhaled slowly, letting the sense of resolve settle deep within her chest. This decision would change her life forever, opening a door into a world of power, danger, and responsibility, but also into one that offered the chance to save her brother and secure his future. Claire promised herself that nothing would stop her now. She would adapt, learn, and face whatever waited ahead. When she opened her eyes, she looked straight at Nate, and in the silence of that moment, her inner voice whispered a vow. Every step from here on must be deliberate, every action calculated. For every move would carry consequences, but also the chance to prove her worth, to protect the only family she had left, and to live with the weight of her choice. Never before had fear and determination felt so close, almost intertwined. And for the first time that day, Claire's heartbeat began to steady, her mind sharpened, fixed on one singular purpose: to save Jake, to survive, and to master the dangerous new world she had just entered. Everything before her, the calm intensity in Nate's gaze, the staggering numbers of hospital fees and salary promises, became both her reason and her fuel. She understood that from this moment forward, her life would never again be the same. The next step would mark the beginning of a journey woven with secrecy, responsibility, and the faint but undeniable pulse of hope. Claire entered her first week of work with a mixture of anticipation and quiet dread, aware that the world she had stepped into bore little resemblance to anything she had ever known. The Bellamy Logistics office, perched on the top floor of a glass tower, shimmered in the morning light. Everything from the sheen of the leather chairs to the abstract art displayed along the walls spoke of power, precision, and control. It felt less like a workplace and more like an ecosystem of influence, one that demanded both obedience and vigilance. Claire began taking on her new responsibilities, managing Nate's schedule, not only the legitimate meetings and corporate briefings, but also a series of discreet calls and confidential documents that required absolute secrecy. Each day, she observed the way Nate handled every situation with unnerving calm, his composure so absolute it seemed almost rehearsed. Mornings became a ritual of discipline, sorting through emails, reviewing contracts, and learning to detect the subtleties hidden in a tone of voice or a glance between partners, the kind of details that revealed what was truly at stake behind polite conversation. She often found herself revisiting that moment of decision, the instant she agreed to step into this world for Jake's sake. The weight of responsibility still pressed heavily on her, but it was also what kept her steady. Very quickly, she understood that in Nate's world, no detail was too small. The exact timing of a meeting, the placement of a document on a desk, even the order of a signature, each could alter the course of a negotiation. During those first days, she filled notebook after notebook with careful annotations, cross-checking details, comparing numbers, noting inconsistencies. She trained herself to observe without reacting, to think before she spoke, to separate emotion from judgment. Despite the pressure, she noticed a shift in the way Nate regarded her. He was demanding but fair, expecting excellence, yet acknowledging effort. He seemed to value her precision, her endurance under strain. and perhaps even the quiet discipline that came from desperation. In the late afternoons, Claire would sit silently in her corner of the office, listening to Nate's low voice during phone calls, recording every coded phrase, aware that even one error could unravel something far greater than she understood. It was in these moments she realized the extent of the network Nate commanded, one that reached far beyond corporate boardrooms and into realms where information, not money, was the true currency. Each day became a balancing act between fear and duty, between efficiency and secrecy. Claire reminded herself again and again that everything she did was for Jake, that his recovery and future depended entirely on her ability to stay sharp and invisible. The exhaustion was relentless. She often came home too drained to do more than collapse on the narrow bed in her small apartment. Yet every morning, she forced herself up, driven by the image of her brother breathing peacefully in a hospital room bought by her choices. Gradually, she learned to adapt to the rhythm of constant tension. Every movement in that office was measured, every conversation layered with unspoken meaning. She began to understand that Nate's authority did not come solely from wealth or influence, but from his mastery of information, his ability to read people, to anticipate their actions, to bind loyalty through a precise balance of trust, fear, and reward. Claire started taking mental notes of everyone around her. Anthony, Nate's loyal assistant, whose every step and gesture seemed choreographed, the analysts who whispered in corridors, the visitors who never signed in but always left with sealed envelopes. She watched, listened, and learned. In time, the fear that had consumed her began to evolve into something else, a grim kind of focus, even fascination. The early days of being Nate's shadow assistant no longer felt like pure survival, but like a test she was determined to pass. Each day sharpened her instincts, teaching her how to maneuver, interpret, and respond. Every night, as she returned to her modest apartment, the tremor in her hands lingered, but alongside it came a growing awareness of her own transformation. She was changing, hardening, becoming more alert. Jake's survival now depended not only on Nate's money, but on her ability to adapt, to observe, to learn, and to execute without error. And Claire understood, with chilling clarity, that a single mistake would not only cost her everything, but might also destroy the one person she had sworn to protect above all else. Claire was beginning to understand that the world she had entered was far more than an elegant office or a collection of polished contracts. It was an intricate web of power, precision, and quiet danger, more complex than anything she had ever imagined. Every detail surrounding Nate carried meaning: the way meetings were timed to the minute, the people who accompanied him, the subtle exchange of glances, the measured steps, all of it choreographed with deliberate intent. She watched Anthony, Nate's longtime aide, move through the office like a shadow, anticipating problems before they arose, resolving them silently before Nate ever needed to speak. Over time, Claire realized that this carefully constructed order existed not only to protect wealth but to safeguard lives. She observed the phone calls that came in, the visitors who stopped by, the coded language woven seamlessly into casual conversation. Gradually, she recognized that the contracts she managed, once thought to be legitimate business transactions, were only the visible surface of something much deeper, a facade that concealed intricate and possibly illicit operations beneath. These early days became her education in subtext. She learned to read between the lines, to catch the faintest signals in a tone of voice, a shift in posture, a pause too long to be casual. Each silence carried weight, each word chosen with care. Claire began to grasp that true power did not come solely from money or property. It was born from control of information, of outcomes, of people. It was the ability to predict, to influence, to inspire loyalty that balanced on the knife edge between respect and fear. She saw Nate negotiate with industry magnates, men and women whose names carried influence in logistics, trade, and finance. Their exchanges were brief, their expressions cool, their intentions masked. Yet every decision was dissected with microscopic precision. each move designed to maximize advantage and eliminate risk. When Nate took her along to meetings, instructing her only to observe and take notes, Claire found herself witnessing the machinery of power in motion. It was not brute force that ruled this world, but strategy, information, foresight, and the capacity to stay 3 steps ahead of anyone else in the room. Piece by piece, she began connecting what she saw: import-export deals that intersected with private security contracts, discrete favors traded between companies, port access agreements negotiated through layers of intermediaries. There were threads linking everything, an invisible architecture of influence that Nate both maintained and manipulated. Fear and fascination wove together in Claire's chest. She knew she was standing in the center of something vast, where every action, every signature, could shift the balance of fortunes and perhaps even lives. She trained herself to categorize what she heard, what to store in silence, what to dismiss, what to pass along only when asked. She realized that her survival here depended not on charm or intellect alone, but on composure, the ability to remain calm while chaos pulsed quietly beneath the surface. These first weeks taught her the strength of restraint, the quiet discipline of holding one's expression steady, of measuring breath before speaking, of listening longer than others dared. She began to sense her own transformation, an awareness sharpening day by day. The anxiety that had once consumed her was still there, but now it lived beside something else, a rising clarity, a sense of purpose shaped by necessity. Through it all, the thought of Jake remained constant: his recovery, his future, the fragile line tying her to everything she did. Every task she completed, every decision she made, was no longer just part of her job, it was a calculation of survival. Claire understood that from this point on, every step would be watched, every word remembered. Only vigilance, intelligence, and absolute loyalty could keep her safe, could keep Jake safe, and preserve her place within the shadowed network of power she had willingly stepped into. A world as perilous as it was mesmerizing, one she had never dreamed could exist until now. The first days in her new role taught Claire more than just how Nate's empire operated. They revealed the subtle, shifting boundaries that defined their relationship. Every time she stood beside him in the office, watching meetings unfold or reviewing contracts together, she sensed a quiet change in the way he regarded her. His gaze wasn't merely that of a composed employer. There were fleeting moments when it carried a kind of focus she couldn't quite name, something deeper, almost personal. In the smallest gestures, the way he corrected her placement of a document, or how his hand brushed lightly against her hair when the wind from the window caught it, there lingered a refinement, a quiet care that he never extended to anyone else. One late afternoon, as they reviewed an important set of files, the sunlight streamed through the tall windows and cast a shadow across Nate's face. Claire felt her pulse quicken unexpectedly, a tension both anxious and strangely curious. He spoke to her about negotiations and logistics, yet his tone softened at times, laced with warmth and the occasional touch of humor that eased the relentless tension of their work. She tried to focus, to remain professional, but there was no denying the flutter that rose each time he spoke her name with that quiet precision, or when his eyes lingered on her face for a heartbeat too long once the room was empty. It dawned on her that Nate's observation of her went beyond assessing competence. He was studying her, understanding her in ways that felt almost intimate, as though he sought to read her thoughts rather than her performance. One evening, when they were the last two remaining in the office, Nate mentioned details she had once shared about Jake: the cost of his tuition, her constant worry over his recovery. The fact that he remembered, that he listened so closely, left her momentarily disarmed. It wasn't manipulation, at least, it didn't feel that way. It was something subtler, an attentiveness that existed somewhere between strategy and genuine concern. Claire found herself trying to define the line between fear and fascination, between the pressure of her duties and the quiet sense of connection that seemed to grow in the spaces between words. Those fleeting moments, the brush of fingers as they exchanged documents, the shared silence as he outlined a plan, were charged with a quiet electricity, a reminder of the dangerous chemistry simmering beneath their professional surface. She knew that what she felt was perilous. In this world, where power tilted unmistakably in Nate's favor. A single misplaced emotion could be ruinous. Yet no matter how hard she tried, her heart had begun to recognize something she couldn't reason away, a pull that neither logic nor caution could contain. Balancing this unspoken tension became part of her daily discipline. She learned to school her features, to bury emotion beneath composure, aware that any hint of vulnerability could jeopardize everything: her position, her safety, and most of all, Jake's security. But even under that pressure, the quiet intervals between tasks, the way Nate would sometimes simply watch her work, or listen in silence before offering a faint, almost imperceptible smile, became the rarest moments of calm in her turbulent days. In a world built on danger, secrecy, and precision, those moments of unspoken understanding felt like something sacred, something human. Claire began to accept that in this new life, she was no longer just an observer standing at the edges of Nate's power. She was becoming a part of it, a vital thread in a web where authority, duty, and emotion coexisted in uneasy harmony. And somewhere within that convergence, in the tension between restraint and attraction, the foundation of something unpredictable had begun to take shape, something that would test both her heart and her resolve, forcing her to navigate the thin line between loyalty, survival, and the quiet yearning she could no longer deny. One late afternoon, when the office was quieter than usual, Claire was reviewing a stack of confidential contracts inside the secured file room when an unfamiliar sound drifted in from the hallway. Her heart lurched violently, her entire body tightening like a drawn wire, as the realization struck this could be what she had always feared but never faced. Someone had broken in to steal Nate's information. She froze, her breath shallow, straining to make sense of the voices and the rhythmic thud of footsteps. The language was foreign, the words sharp and indistinct, carrying a tone that chilled her blood. Panic and adrenaline tangled within her, stretching every second into an eternity. She knew she couldn't afford to be seen. One mistake, or one noise, and everything: Jake's safety, Nate's secrets, her fragile place in this world could unravel in an instant. Claire crouched low, pressing herself against the file cabinets, her trembling hand gripping a pen for balance. Through the narrow slit of the door, she saw two figures move swiftly across the floor. They were methodical, deliberate, pulling drawers open, shuffling through papers, their movements too controlled to be random. The sharp crack of metal locks snapping filled the silence like the ticking of a countdown. The scent of sweat and cold iron seeped into the air, and Claire's pulse pounded so loud it felt deafening. She could feel danger breathing down her neck when one of the intruders bent down, peering closer toward her hiding spot. Every muscle in her body screamed. She knew she had only one chance to act before she became the target. Her fingers brushed the nearest object, a crystal signing pen, heavy and solid, and before fear could stop her, she swung it with all her strength. The blow landed hard, the shock of impact jarring through her arm. The man crumpled, his body collapsing to the floor with a dull thud. The second intruder spun around, pulling out a gun. Claire's breath caught. Her body froze. Yet her mind raced through the layout of the room, the desk, the filing cabinets, the narrow opening between shelves. There was no time. She pressed her hand over her mouth, forcing her breathing silent, then darted toward the exit. At that precise moment, Anthony appeared, silent and swift as a shadow. The confrontation was instantaneous, a flash of motion, a gunshot tearing through the ceiling, the crash of bodies colliding, the air filled with shouts, the metallic tang of fear, the chaos of violence compressed into seconds. Claire pressed herself flat against the cabinets, trembling as the struggle erupted just feet away. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, it was over. One intruder lay motionless, the other groaning in pain. Anthony stood over them, his expression calm but lethal, checking for weapons before turning to Claire. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice steady, eyes scanning her for wounds. She looked down at her shaking hands, at the small scratches on her arm minor, but her body felt hollow, vibrating with shock. She realized she had come terrifyingly close to disaster. Moments later, Nate entered. His composure was absolute, his silence heavier than the chaos that had preceded him. His sharp gaze swept across the room, taking in the broken locks, the overturned papers, the unconscious men. He didn't scold. He didn't even raise his voice. He listened as Anthony recounted the events, nodding once, the tension in the air shifting from fury to focus. Claire stood motionless, her breath uneven, caught between relief and dread. The enormity of what had just happened settled over her. This was no longer just a job, no longer just about protecting Jake. She had stepped fully into Nate's world, a world where danger wasn't an abstraction, where survival depended on reflexes, loyalty, and control. As Nate walked past her, his presence radiated authority and something else, a silent warning, a shield, a promise. Each step echoed through the office, like a reminder that nothing here happened by chance, that everything and everyone was under his watch. Claire's heart still raced, but amid the fear, a strange understanding took hold. Their connection had changed. They were no longer simply boss and employee. They were now bound by circumstance, by survival, by the fragile trust that might one day mean the difference between life and death in the shadowed network she had chosen to enter. After the incident at the office, Nate decided to bring Claire to his estate to ensure her absolute safety. And as she followed him through its gates, she felt as though she had stepped into an entirely different world, a world that glittered with security and luxury, but carried an undercurrent of invisible confinement. The mansion stood on an expansive stretch of land, guarded by high steel gates, a network of surveillance cameras, and a security team that moved with quiet precision. Its modern architecture was softened by warm lighting and elegant details. Sunlight poured through large glass panels, glinting off polished wood and framed paintings, casting a serene yet controlled atmosphere that left Claire both awed and uneasy. As she walked through the main hall, she began to notice that nothing was accidental. Every arrangement, from the placement of furniture to the positioning of windows, seemed designed to anticipate risk, to monitor, to control. She felt simultaneously protected and caged, like a small bird inside a gilded enclosure. Her heartbeat quickened as Nate guided her into the living room, where deep leather armchairs and heavy oak tables gave the space an air of command. He turned to her with that steady, unreadable gaze, a gaze that made it clear she was safe. Yes, but also that from this moment forward, her movements, her choices, her very existence would remain under his watch. Relief mingled uneasily with apprehension. The immediate threat had passed. Yet in its place arose a new kind of tension, one that wasn't physical but psychological. Freedom, she realized, had been replaced by protection. Every corridor she walked down held a camera's quiet stare. Every corner, a reminder that security could easily blur into surveillance. She could feel the invisible boundaries closing in, an understanding that living within these walls meant abiding by rules she hadn't yet learned. Nate explained that her presence there wasn't solely for protection but for efficiency. Living at the estate would allow her to handle sensitive documents, attend private meetings, and remain within reach at all times. It was practical, he said, essential for her safety and his operations. Claire nodded, outwardly composed, but inside she wrestled with conflicting emotions. Gratitude for his concern and unease over the growing loss of autonomy. The realization settled over her like a fine mist that every privilege carried its price. Standing by the window, she looked out onto the vast gardens bathed in the soft glow of dusk. The scene was breathtaking rows of sculpted hedges, fountains glistening under the setting sun, the quiet hum of order, but beneath its calm beauty, she felt the echo of solitude. Safety could be golden, but it could also be lonely. Still, she reminded herself why she was here. This was the cost of saving Jake, of ensuring he would never again lie in a hospital bed haunted by pain or fear. It was a sacrifice she had chosen, and it demanded strength. If she was to survive in Nate's world, a world built on secrets, power, and risk, she would have to master her own restraint and awareness. In her first days within the mansion, Claire began to adapt to its rhythm. She noticed everything: the footsteps of guards passing at regular intervals, the discreet communication among staff, the soft click of security doors. Every sound seemed amplified, every gesture significant. She learned to move carefully, to listen more than she spoke, to sense the flow of control that governed the estate. What was meant to be her sanctuary was also her test. Physical safety was no longer her only concern. It was mental endurance that would determine how long she could remain useful and alive in Nate's intricate world. Each step she took through those corridors demanded awareness and precision. Every conversation, every action, had weight. Claire understood now that the life she had entered was as alluring as it was perilous, a place where protection and captivity, trust and control, power and dependence intertwined seamlessly. From this moment on, she wasn't living only to protect Jake. She was learning to navigate the web of influence that surrounded Nate Bellamy, where one mistake could carry devastating consequences. And she knew, with a quiet certainty, that her ability to observe, adapt, and understand the man who held her fate and her brother's would determine not just her survival, but her place in the world she could no longer leave behind. That first night in the mansion, after the guards had withdrawn and silence settled over the vast house, Claire felt her heartbeat quicken in a way she had never known before. The soft glow from the wall sconces cast long, shifting shadows across the walls, filling the room with a warmth that carried tension beneath its surface. She sat on the edge of the sofa, her palms pressed against her knees, watching Nate as he stood near the tall window. The faint reflection of light traced his profile, the calm certainty in his posture, the intensity in his gaze, and for the first time, she sensed something entirely different between them. The stillness around them sharpened every sound, the faint rustle of fabric, the echo of her own breath, the steady rhythm of his steps as he turned toward her. When he spoke, his voice was low and even, asking if she was tired, but there was a softness beneath the question, a quiet concern that lingered longer than it should have. His eyes studied her face as though memorizing its lines, and she felt the space between duty and emotion begin to dissolve. As he moved closer, the air seemed to shift. The gravity of the room changed. He sat beside her, their shoulders almost touching, and when their hands brushed just lightly, it was enough to send a quiet current through her body. Her pulse stumbled. The contact was fleeting, accidental, yet charged with something unspoken. Claire's thoughts blurred, caught between awareness and longing, between reason and instinct. Nate leaned forward, his expression still composed but softened by something warmer, something human. When he placed his hand gently over hers, she felt the strength in his touch restrained by care. Her breath caught, her chest tightening with confusion and a strange kind of peace. The security she had found in this house now came with an invisible weight, an emotional tether she hadn't expected. She tried to steady herself, inhaling deeply, but every gesture, every glance from him seemed to pull her further into that quiet gravity. When his hand moved to her shoulder, firm yet deliberate, she felt warmth spread through her like a pulse. It was comfort, but also a warning, a reminder of how easily safety could turn into surrender. The silence between them grew heavy with meaning. The world outside the mansion faded, and in that stillness, the boundaries of power, duty, and feeling dissolved into something unguarded. When Nate tilted his head closer, the space between them disappeared. She could hear his breathing steady, calm, deliberate, and beneath it, her own heart racing in answer. The moment carried no words, no promises, just a fragile exchange of trust and tension. The warmth of him beside her steadied her even as it overwhelmed her. The quiet rhythm of his heartbeat, grounding her in a way that words never could. In that dimly lit room, every fear, every rule, every barrier that had defined their relationship seemed to blur. What remained was a connection subtle but undeniable, delicate yet deep, that neither of them had sought, but both now felt. As the night unfolded in quiet gestures and unspoken glances, the air between them shifted irreversibly. Claire understood, with a mix of awe and trepidation, that something had begun, something neither entirely safe nor easily undone. When dawn would come, It would find her changed. The world she had entered one of power, secrecy, and risk now carried another layer. A pulse of emotion she could no longer ignore. That night, in the hush of the mansion, affection and authority, protection and danger intertwined, weaving together the beginning of a bond that would alter the course of both their lives. One morning, after a few rare days of calm, Nate summoned Claire into his private office. His expression was grave, his voice low and deliberate, carrying the weight of something about to break. The peace that had settled over the mansion now felt fragile, almost illusory. Claire sensed it immediately. This quiet had been nothing more than a pause before the storm. Nate explained that Victor, an old rival known for his ruthless ambition, was moving to seize control of his operations in the city. This time, the conflict would not remain hidden behind veiled threats or legal maneuvers. It was turning into a confrontation that could erupt into violence at any moment. Claire felt her pulse spike, a rush of dread tightening her chest. Fear for herself mingled with deeper worry for Jake, whose safety was now inseparable from Nate's ability to stay ahead of the danger. Nate's tone was measured but unyielding as he gave instructions. She was to change her daily routes, keep her phone charged at all times, and remain alert to even the smallest irregularity. Every detail mattered, every second could determine survival. In the days that followed, Claire witnessed firsthand how Nate operated when threatened. He was precise, methodical, and unnervingly calm. Reinforcements were called in, loyal partners discreetly contacted, and streams of information about Victor's movements flowed through the house like hidden currents. What unfolded before her was not simply a struggle for dominance, it was a chess game where power, loyalty, and life itself were the stakes. Claire found herself drawn deeper into the machinery of Nate's defense. She analyzed call logs, transcribed coded messages, and learned to read tone and hesitation the way others might study numbers. Every clue mattered, the pauses between words, the rhythm of speech, the patterns of Victor's schedule, the skills she had once used as Nate's shadow assistant. Observation, patience, and deduction now became vital tools for survival. One afternoon, as they reviewed reports in Nate's office, he outlined the possible consequences if Victor escalated the conflict. The air felt charged, heavy. Claire watched the tension ripple through him, his eyes sharp, his hands tightening slightly against the table. In that moment, she realized how much calculation lay beneath his composure. Every move, every silence, was strategic. The room seemed to hum with the gravity of unseen forces closing in, and Claire felt the burden of it settle on her shoulders. She wasn't merely a bystander anymore, she was part of the plan. A wrong step could cost them more than money, it could cost lives. She began training herself to stay composed, to think clearly even when fear pressed against her ribs. In Nate's world, survival depended not on luck, but on awareness, on the ability to remain steady when everything around you was shifting. She studied the way he communicated with Anthony and the security team, how every order was delivered with precision and calm authority. It comforted her, even as it reminded her of the stakes. There was safety in his control, but also immense pressure. When night fell, Claire often found herself by the window overlooking the vast garden. The soft flicker of security lights dotted the grounds, their rhythm steady yet faintly ominous. The beauty of the scene couldn't mask the tension beneath it, the knowledge that danger was circling closer each day. The coming confrontation would test not only Nate's power but her own endurance, her ability to remain steady and make decisions under fire. As she stood there, the weight of everything pressed down: fear, loyalty, the strange bond between her and Nate that had grown in the shadow of chaos. It was both her strength and her vulnerability. The thought frightened her, yet it also gave her purpose. She understood now that what lay ahead would reshape more than the empire Nate had built. It would define their trust, their survival, and perhaps, in ways neither could yet admit, the fate of their hearts. As night fell, Nate led Claire and his security team to the warehouse where Victor was expected to make his move, a test of dominance that would determine who truly held control. The pale neon lights flickered against stacks of shipping crates, casting cold shadows that stretched across the concrete floor. The air was thick with tension. Claire's pulse raced so hard she could feel it in her throat. Every sense sharpened, every breath felt loud enough to betray her position. She knew that one mistake, one misplaced sound could unravel everything. The stillness was fractured by the echo of footsteps, quick, deliberate, closing in. Her grip tightened around the strap of her bag as she pressed herself closer to the crates. Her eyes locked on Nate and the guards. The realization hit her. This was no longer a business rivalry. This was war. Then Victor appeared, flanked by his men. His expression was calm, cold, merciless. For a single, suspended heartbeat, no one moved. Then chaos erupted. Gunfire shattered the silence, ricocheting through the metal beams. Shouts filled the air, mingling with the clang of steel and the acrid sting of gunpowder. Claire ducked instinctively, her body trembling as she sought cover behind a stack of boxes. Every sound, the whistle of bullets, the groan of shifting crates carved itself into her mind. Through the haze, she saw Nate at the front of his team, moving with terrifying precision. His commands cut through the noise, crisp and decisive. His body shielded yet exposed, leading instead of hiding. Claire's heart clenched when she saw him stumble. A sharp movement followed by a grimace of pain. He fell to one knee, a burst of red staining his shirt. For an instant, her world went silent. Without thinking, she ran. Survival instinct and something deeper fused together. Grabbing the nearest heavy object, a metal bar, she moved toward him, every muscle shaking but determined. The world narrowed to the space between them. She could feel the vibration of gunfire in her bones. Nate looked up just long enough to meet her eyes, his face pale but unbroken, and in that glance, something fierce passed between them. Fear, defiance, connection. He pushed himself up, blood seeping through his sleeve, and kept shouting orders, refusing to yield. Claire ducked behind him, scanning the scene, her mind mapping every movement like a reflex. The battle was short but brutal. Anthony and the guards overwhelmed part of Victor's crew, subduing them one by one. Smoke hung heavy in the air, thick and metallic. Claire pressed herself against the crates, gasping, heart pounding like a drum, the taste of fear sharp in her mouth. When it was finally over, silence reclaimed the warehouse. The last of Victor's men lay disarmed on the ground. Nate stood unsteadily, leaning against a crate, his breathing ragged. Claire rushed to him, her hands trembling as she reached for his arm. Blood soaked through the fabric at his shoulder, dark and wet. Relief and terror crashed together inside her. "You're hurt," she whispered, voice breaking. Nate only shook his head, his eyes steady, the faintest flicker of exhaustion betraying him. "It's nothing," he said, though the weight in his voice told her otherwise. As she pressed a cloth against the wound, her hands brushed his skin warm, alive, trembling slightly from adrenaline. She realized, with a strange, painful clarity, that she had almost lost him. The thought hollowed her. In that dim, smoke-streaked warehouse, surrounded by the remnants of violence, something shifted between them again. Their bond, once built on trust and necessity, now carried the weight of survival. Every look, every touch bore the memory of the night they had fought side by side. When the flashing lights from the security convoy finally faded, leaving only silence and the faint hum of machinery, Claire stood beside Nate. The air was thick with the smell of metal and smoke, the ground littered with the proof of what power demanded. Nate exhaled slowly, the tension in his shoulders easing just enough for her to sense the man beneath the armor. And Claire understood, with every beat of her racing heart, that there was no turning back. What bound them now was more than duty or circumstance. It was the dangerous fusion of loyalty, emotion, and survival, a connection born not in comfort, but in chaos. In that moment, she knew her life would never again return to ordinary. She was part of Nate's world now, its power, its peril, its undeniable pull. In the tense days that followed the warehouse confrontation, Claire lived in a fragile rhythm of recovery inside Nate's mansion. Her body ached. Her pulse still quickened at the memory of that night, the gunfire, the smell of metal, the moment she thought she might lose everything. Yet beneath the exhaustion pulsed something steadier, gratitude and resolve. Nate was alive. She was alive. And now, survival had to mean more than luck. It had to be discipline, awareness, control. She spent her mornings regaining balance, steadying her breath, relearning calm, sharpening her senses. She moved through the house with a quiet alertness, noticing details she had once overlooked, the angle of a shadow, the rhythm of approaching footsteps, the tone in a voice carried through the hall. It wasn't paranoia anymore, it was adaptation. Every observation was a lesson, every moment a chance to ensure she would never again be caught off guard. Each morning, she watched Nate from the edge of the training courtyard. He worked with deliberate focus, mapping out strategy after strategy, his gestures measured, his mind always calculating the next move. Claire took notes, studied his methods, and began to understand the patterns, the way information and anticipation could be more powerful than any weapon. She absorbed everything: how he analyzed risk, how he read people, how silence itself could become a tactic. The bond between them deepened in those hours, not through words, but through a shared vigilance, an unspoken acknowledgement that they were standing together against something vast and dangerous. In her quiet moments, Claire thought often of Jake. He was the reason she had stepped into this world, the anchor that kept her grounded amid the shifting alliances and constant peril. Yet now, her reasons had evolved. Protecting Jake was still her core, but she had also begun to understand that her presence beside Nate mattered, that her judgment, her steadiness, her intuition had become part of the framework holding his empire together. This realization both humbled and strengthened her. Nate's presence was constant, sometimes commanding, sometimes unexpectedly gentle. When he looked at her, his eyes carried both authority and a depth of trust that unsettled her in its sincerity. It wasn't the gaze of a man assessing an employee, but of someone recognizing an equal, a partner. And though she told herself to stay composed, Claire couldn't ignore the warmth that came with that trust, the quiet assurance that, in this world of danger and deceit, she was no longer alone. As she healed, their interactions became less formal, more instinctive. The boundaries that once defined them, boss and assistant, protector and protected, began to blur into something far more intricate. Every glance, every silence held weight. Between the layers of power and fear, there was connection, something fragile, yet unbreakable. At night, when the mansion fell into stillness, Claire often sat by the window, gazing out at the faint glow of the city beyond the gates. The lights reflected on the glass like fragments of memory, both distant and within reach. She knew peace was temporary, that danger never truly left. But the quiet around her wasn't emptiness, it was preparation. Her heartbeat had found a steadier rhythm. She knew now that staying was not surrender, it was a choice. To protect Jake, to stand beside Nate, to learn, adapt, and face whatever came next. In choosing to remain, she wasn't just clinging to safety, she was claiming strength, a place, and a purpose in a world that once terrified her. Claire understood that her decision marked a turning point. She was no longer simply Nate Bellamy's assistant. She was his ally, an essential part of his world. The choice to stay was a promise, to herself, to her brother, and to the man who had both saved and changed her life. And as the city lights flickered against the dark horizon, Claire felt it with quiet certainty. Whatever waited ahead, she would not turn back. Weeks of observation and recovery had reshaped Claire's world into one of precision and quiet determination. Then, one morning, Nate called her into his office with an expression that mixed gravity and calm pride. He announced that it was time to restructure the organization and that she would assume the role of chief executive officer for all legitimate operations. For a moment, Claire could only stare. Her breath caught somewhere between disbelief and emotion. Every sleepless night, every calculated decision, every ounce of restraint had been seen, measured, and now rewarded. When she stepped into her new office, morning light streamed through the vast windows, spilling across polished wood and neat stacks of contracts. The space felt both powerful and intimate, a reflection of the position she now held. Nate stood by the window, his tone steady yet unmistakably warm as he explained her new responsibilities. Oversight of all legal ventures, from import and real estate to the restaurant chains, alongside discreet supervision of the more delicate operations that few ever spoke of. Claire's pulse raced as she listened. The scope of it was staggering. This was no longer about survival, it was leadership. Her decisions would ripple outward to employees, to partners, to the fragile balance of power that sustained Nate's empire. When she finally sat behind the executive desk, the weight of the chair felt symbolic authority intertwined with accountability. But when Nate's gaze met hers, steady and sure, the anxiety melted into resolve. He trusted her completely. The days that followed were a blur of learning and adaptation. Claire reviewed contracts with an analytical sharpness she hadn't realized she possessed. She identified risks, spotted opportunities, refined workflows, and built systems of transparency that strengthened the organization from within. Each choice demanded care, legal implications, human cost, strategic impact, all interwoven in a network where one wrong decision could tip everything into chaos. Yet Claire found rhythm in the complexity. She learned to merge structure with instinct, diplomacy with resolve. Nate remained beside her. No longer merely a superior but a partner, his guidance patient, his presence steady, his faith in her unshaken. Together, they crafted decisions that balanced strength with subtlety, ensuring that both the legitimate and shadowed sides of their world moved in harmony. By the end of her first week, Claire had negotiated several critical deals, earning the respect of the team and the cautious admiration of long-standing associates. The recognition came quietly in nods during meetings. In the measured confidence of those who once underestimated her, she realized then that her choice to stay had not been about fear or obligation. It had been about purpose. Standing by the window of her new office, the city stretched before her in waves of light and motion. The reflection in the glass showed a woman transformed, not a survivor hiding in someone else's shadow, but a leader standing in her own light. Power no longer felt foreign. It felt earned. Claire knew the road ahead would be demanding. Every decision would test her integrity. Every success would invite scrutiny. But she also knew that she belonged here protecting Jake, sustaining the empire she now helped steer, and building a future intertwined with Nate's trust and vision. As the sun dipped behind the skyline, she felt the enormity of it settle around her, a mix of strength, responsibility, and quiet triumph. She had stepped fully into Nate Bellamy's world, not as an observer but as a force within it. And in that moment, watching the city pulse beneath her, Claire understood that this promotion wasn't just an advancement, it was the beginning of a new era, one defined by power, loyalty, and a bond that had evolved far beyond what either of them had ever imagined. One quiet afternoon, as the last of the day's meetings faded and the office fell into calm, Claire's phone rang. Jake's name flashed on the screen, and at the sound of his voice, nervous, curious, searching, she knew the moment she had been avoiding had finally come. It was time to tell him the truth about the life she now lived, the one built in shadows and power, the one she had entered not for ambition but for him. When Jake arrived at the mansion, his eyes widened slightly as he took in the vast halls, the guarded gates, the air of restrained luxury. He had grown taller, more aware, carrying a quiet maturity that made Claire's heart ache with both pride and sadness. As he sat across from her in the grand living room, she saw in his face a reflection of the innocence she had fought so hard to protect. Her voice trembled at first as she began to explain. She spoke of the night he was attacked, the chaos, the unbearable hospital bills, the moment desperation had cornered her into a decision that would change everything. She told him about Nate carefully, deliberately describing the man's influence and danger, but also his sense of order and control, his ability to keep them both safe when the world offered no other choice. She chose her words with precision, offering truth without drowning him in the darker details she knew he was not ready to face. Jake listened without interruption. His eyes grew wide, his expression shifting from shock to fear, to something deeper, a dawning understanding. He realized, perhaps for the first time, how close they had come to losing everything, and how far his sister had gone to save them. When she told him about her new position, the responsibilities, the people depending on her, the risks behind every choice, his posture straightened. There was admiration in his gaze now, mingled with worry. Claire explained that Nate, despite his reputation, had become both protector and ally. He gave us stability. Jake, she said quietly, he gave you the chance to keep studying, to have a future. And I made my choice not because I was forced to, but because protecting you meant stepping into this world and learning how to survive it. Her tone was firm, her eyes unwavering. Jake stayed silent for a long moment after she finished. The room was hushed, the only sound, the faint hum of the city beyond the windows. He looked around at the guards, the polished floors, the heavy quiet that came with wealth and danger, and then back at her. His voice, when it came, was soft but steady. You did all of this for me. Dizada. Claire nodded, her throat tight. Everything I've done, every risk I've taken, it was to make sure you'd never have to face what I did. Dizada. He rose and hugged her, awkwardly at first, then tighter, as if words weren't enough. When he finally pulled away, his eyes still carried worry, but also trust. He understood now, not every detail, not every cost, but enough to see the strength and sacrifice beneath her choices. As Jake left that evening, Claire stood by the window, watching his figure disappear down the long, Lampley Drive. The city stretched beyond, glimmering like a constellation of uncertain futures. She felt lighter somehow, her heart still trembling but steady in its conviction. For the first time, her brother knew who she had become and why. The truth had not divided them, it had bound them closer. Trust had replaced secrecy. Love had deepened into respect. And beneath it all, a quiet determination took root. Claire knew the storms ahead would be fierce, that the world she now lived in would test her again. But as she looked out into the night, she felt ready. She had faced danger for survival now. She would face it for purpose. In the weeks that followed her conversation with Jake, Claire threw herself into the task of securing his future with the same determination that had guided every decision since the night everything changed. Together with Nate, she began charting a path that would free Jake from uncertainty and allow him to pursue the education he deserved. Nate moved quickly, reaching out to his network of scholarship foundations and educational trusts, doors that would have remained forever closed without his name behind them. Claire watched the process unfold, feeling a deep, almost physical sense of relief spread through her chest. For the first time in months, the horizon looked clear. Jake would be safe, cared for, and given a chance to thrive. When the first letter arrived, Jake could hardly believe it. A full scholarship tuition, living expenses, books, everything offered by a prestigious law program he had only ever dreamed about. His hands trembled as he unfolded the papers, his eyes wide with disbelief. There was even a stipend for research and travel. The generosity and precision of the arrangement left him speechless. When he finally looked up at Claire and Nate, his face glowed with awe and gratitude. For a long moment, he simply stood there, understanding that both of them, his sister and the man she now worked beside, had reshaped their lives so his could take flight. Claire took time to walk him through every detail. She explained the structure of the program, the linked internships, the opportunities for mentorship and study abroad. She made sure he understood that this wasn't luck, it was the result of deliberate effort, planning, and alliances carefully built. This is your foundation, she told him softly. But what you build on it, that's all you know. Jake listened in silence, the weight of her words sinking in. For the first time, he saw the world not as something given or denied, but as something earned through trust, resilience, and connection. Over the next several days, Claire helped him complete enrollment forms, organize documentation, and set up his schedule. Watching him work, she saw the change in him, The boy who had once been frightened and uncertain was gone. In his place stood a young man who met every challenge with focus and quiet determination. Claire's heart swelled with pride. The endless nights, the sacrifices, the compromises she had made, they had led to this moment. For the first time in years, she could breathe without the sting of guilt or fear. When the official scholarship confirmation arrived, Jake turned to her, eyes shining with tears, and pulled her into a fierce embrace. "I'll make you proud," he whispered. Claire felt the truth of that promise in his voice. Over Jake's shoulder, she caught Nate's gaze, a faint, knowing smile curving his lips, the kind that spoke of quiet satisfaction rather than victory. That evening, as dusk settled over the city, Claire stood by the tall window, Jake beside her with the acceptance letter still in his hands. The glow of streetlights shimmered across the glass, casting their reflections together, a symbol of everything they had fought for. The fear and exhaustion that once defined her had been replaced by something steadier, hope. For the first time, the future didn't feel like a battle. It felt like a beginning. The risks, the loyalty, the choices they had all converged into this moment of balance, where love and responsibility existed side by side. Nate's influence had given Jake his chance, but it was Claire's strength that had made it possible. And as she looked out over the city, Claire knew this wasn't just the turning of a page, it was the opening of a new chapter for all of them, one built on trust, courage, and a kind of quiet, hard-earned peace. That afternoon was awash in gold. Sunlight spilled over the rooftop garden, gleaming against the glass panels and the wide stretch of manicured lawn below. The air was still but charged, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Claire stood beside Nate, her heart quickening with every second of silence that passed, something in his expression steady, unreadable, but touched with gravity told her he had brought her here for a reason, and her instincts were never wrong. Nate turned toward her, his gaze meeting hers with a depth that seemed to strip away every layer of composure she had learned to wear. His voice, low and unwavering, carried both authority and tenderness as he spoke about the path they had walked together, the dangers survived, the empire rebuilt, the fragile trust that had transformed into unshakable loyalty. He spoke of Jake, of the sacrifices made, of the long nights when Claire had held everything together with quiet courage. And then, as the light shifted across his face, she heard something new in his tone, something vulnerable. He told her that he had watched her grow stronger than anyone he'd ever known, that her intelligence, her calm under pressure, and her unwavering sense of duty had changed not just his world, but him. "You've become more than a partner in this life," he said softly. "You've become someone I can't imagine living without." Added Zong. The words seemed to hang in the warm air between them, carrying a sincerity so rare it left Claire breathless. Then, before she could fully process what was happening, Nate lowered himself to one knee. Sunlight caught the glint of a small box in his hand. When he opened it, the diamond inside caught fire in the afternoon light, sharp, clear, and blindingly beautiful. His voice trembled ever so slightly when he spoke again, but his conviction was absolute. "I don't just want you by my side in business or in this world we've built," he said. "I want you in every part of my life. I want you to be my family, my peace, my future. Claire, will you marry me?" For a heartbeat, everything stopped. The city below faded. The breeze fell silent, and all she could hear was the thunder of her own pulse. Every memory, every moment of fear, sacrifice, an impossible choice rose within her and converged into this single point of clarity. The woman who had once stepped into his world for survival now stood here, loved and chosen, not out of necessity but out of fate. Her eyes blurred with tears as she realized that all the fear and chaos had led her here to a moment of stillness that felt both terrifying and perfect. The man before her, powerful yet open, was offering something no one else ever had, not safety, not wealth, but belonging, a future built on both love and purpose. Her breath trembled as she whispered yes, then louder, steadier, her voice filled with quiet certainty. "Yes, Nate, I want this. I want us. Downser. Nate's eyes softened, his composure breaking into a rare, unguarded smile. He slipped the ring onto her finger, his hand lingering around hers as if to promise she would never face another moment alone. Then he rose, drawing her into his arms. The sunlight wrapped around them, warm and weightless. From now on, he murmured against her hair, we move forward together. Whatever comes, we face it as one. Downser. Claire closed her eyes, letting the sound of his heartbeat steady hers. She could feel it then, the merging of two lives that had begun in crisis and grown into something larger, steadier, and unshakable. Around them, the wind stirred the garden leaves, carrying the scent of jasmine and sun-warmed stone. For the first time in what felt like forever, Claire felt complete. The danger, the sleepless nights, the unrelenting sense of duty, all of it had led to this. Love and responsibility no longer stood at odds. They had become the same force, binding her to Nate and to the life they would build together. As the sun sank behind the city skyline, painting the sky in hues of amber and rose, Claire knew that this moment the rooftop, the light, the ring, the promise would live within her forever. It wasn't the end of their story. It was the beginning of something stronger, a union forged from trust, courage, and the kind of love that not even power or danger could destroy. In the weeks that followed their wedding, Claire began to notice the faintest shifts within herself, small, inexplicable changes that stirred both wonder and unease. The gentle waves of nausea in the mornings, the quicker rhythm of her heartbeat, the subtle pull of exhaustion that no amount of rest could soothe. It was as if her body were whispering a secret before her mind dared to believe it. Then, one quiet afternoon, realization washed over her like sunlight breaking through clouds. A new life was growing inside her. The discovery left her trembling with joy and awe. There was happiness. Yes, but also a deep, humbling awareness of the responsibility now forming within her. When she told Nate, his reaction was immediate and wordless. He stepped closer, his eyes softening with a warmth that seemed to melt the air between them. He placed his hand gently over her stomach, his voice low and resolute. We'll protect this child, he said, his tone both a promise and a vow. In that moment, the fortress of power he had built around their lives became something more intimate, a shield of love. At the doctor's office days later, the sound of their baby's heartbeat filled the room. It was rapid and delicate, like the flutter of wings, and when Claire heard it, tears welled in her eyes. Nate reached for her hand, his thumb brushing her skin with unspoken tenderness. His eyes glistened with pride and reverence, and for the first time in months, all traces of tension seemed to vanish from his face. The dangers and battles of the past receded, replaced by the quiet, breathtaking certainty of new beginnings. Claire began adjusting her days with deliberate care. She balanced her demanding role as COO with the tender discipline of motherhood-to-be, nourishing her body, resting when she could, allowing herself moments of stillness. The dual weight of responsibility and joy pressed gently on her shoulders, but it was a burden she carried with grace. Everything she had fought for, every late night, every sacrifice now had a clear, tangible purpose. A future was taking shape, and it was growing inside her. Nate, for his part, became her anchor. He rearranged his schedule, took over tasks she once insisted on managing, and ensured that her needs were met before she could even voice them. He reminded her to eat, made her tea when fatigue struck, and sat beside her in silence when emotion overcame words. His care was not grand or theatrical, it was steady, constant, and deeply human. In every gesture, Claire felt not only his love but his respect. He made her feel safe in a way she hadn't known safety could exist. Each evening, they would sit together on the terrace, talking softly about the future. They discussed names, imagined nursery colors, and pictured lazy Sunday mornings with the soft cry of an infant echoing through the halls. Claire found herself smiling more easily, her laughter returning after years of restraint. The world that had once revolved around power and survival now revolved around life, warmth, and hope. When she told Jake the news, his reaction was pure light. His eyes shone with excitement, pride, and something deeper, a realization of how far they had come. He promised to be there for her child, to protect and love the baby as if it were his own. And in his words, Claire heard the echo of the bond that had always guided her decisions. She saw in him not the frightened boy she had once shielded, but a man ready to carry forward the same strength and love she had taught him. As the weeks passed, Claire began to feel the first flutters within her, tiny movements like whispers from beneath her heart. Each one filled her with a sense of wonder so profound it nearly brought her to tears. That fragile rhythm beneath her skin was more than life. It was proof that every choice, every risk, every moment of faith had been worth it. She was no longer just a woman navigating a world of power and peril. She was a mother, a protector, and a creator of futures. At night, she and Nate would sit by the window, the city glowing beneath them like a field of stars. His arm rested protectively around her as both their hands settled on the gentle curve of her belly. No words were needed. Their eyes met, filled with love and fierce resolve. For the first time, Claire felt the story of her life come full circle. Every fear, every sacrifice, every act of courage had led here to a moment of stillness, where love and responsibility were no longer separate but one and the same. Beneath the vast, golden light of the city, she understood that their greatest power was not in the empire they built, but in the life they were about to bring into the world, a life that would carry forward everything they had fought to protect. Claire stood on the rooftop terrace of the mansion, her hand intertwined with Nate's as the city shimmered below in a sea of golden lights. Her heart swelled with emotion. From a desperate assistant once terrified for her brother's future, she had crossed storms she once thought would break her, facing danger, power, and impossible choices, and emerged stronger. She had learned to balance love and duty, heart and ambition, to become not only a woman of influence but also a sister, a mother, and a partner who could stand firm in a world that had once seemed unlivable. She finally understood that true strength did not come from wealth or authority, but from endurance, loyalty, and love, the courage to risk everything for what truly mattered, to protect what could never be replaced, and to build something lasting for the people she loved. Beside her, Nate stood quietly, the man who had once been her storm, and now her anchor, her mentor, protector, and equal. Looking at him, Claire realized that relationships built on trust, honesty, and tenderness could withstand anything. Happiness, she thought, was not about avoiding hardship, but about walking through it together, creating a life rich with meaning and connection. Through Claire's story, we are reminded that courage, sacrifice, and faith in the right people are the cornerstones of lasting happiness. Power and responsibility mean little without compassion and integrity, and every crisis carries within it the seed of transformation. We grow, we learn, and we discover that love, real, loyal, and selfless, can turn even the darkest moments into the foundation of something beautiful. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more emotional and inspiring videos each day. Like and share this story with friends who might need its message. And tell us, did Claire and Nate's journey remind you of something from your own life? Leave a comment below and share what you felt. Every word you write will be read and treasured. Claire's story reminds us that within every challenge lies a chance to grow, to build something meaningful, and to rediscover the strength that lives quietly inside us. Love, loyalty, and responsibility can turn pain into wisdom and struggle into peace, and we are never truly alone when we cherish those who care for us. Thank you for watching. May your days be filled with health, joy, and calm. See you in the next video.